Members, the sergeants at arms and any officers appointed by him are directed to send for all absentees whose attendance is not excused for the purpose of securing and maintaining their attendance, under warrant of arrest if necessary. Members, under the rules, while the House is under a call, any member who wishes to leave the hall must have the written permission of the
Hi, Zach. Welcome to Next Generation Politics Podcast. Zach is an intern with Jasmine Crockett. Can you tell us a little bit of what you do with Jasmine?
I am so proud to assist Representative Crockett in managing her social media and constituent services. We are very intentional with helping the folks in our district, making sure that they have their calls received and are heard.
Thank you. And would you say that with the Republicans trying to ram through these bills, like the dangerous election bill and the discriminatory trans bill, has it been hard to focus on the issues facing Jasmine's constituents with these Republican distractions?
Absolutely. Representative Crockett has said it a number of times, and unfortunately, it is incredibly true. We have been playing too much defense and not enough offense. We have so many, progressive ideas, progressive policy points that we want to get passed through this House and the Senate and helping the people of this state. But the problem is all we get to do is play defense. We're always fighting against these horrible extremist attempts to grab at our rights, especially our voting rights. And exactly, we don't get to then talk about, decriminalizing marijuana. We don't get to talk about expanding solar tax credits.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's a shame because it's like, her constituents really do need issues solved. And it's all over the country. Like in Pennsylvania, Republicans are wasting their time on trying to overturn the 2020 election when a lot of times they're representing very poor constituents and their issues aren't being addressed. But I did want to ask, do you know what the Democrats want to get out of going to Washington, D.C.? Do you think they'll put a lot of pressure on Joe Biden to try to push the voting rights bill through Congress?
Absolutely. And that is part of the reason of why they chose D.C. to flee to, because they can go there and keep working. Just a small portion of our Democratic caucus was there about a month ago, pressuring representatives and senators to get the For the People Act through, because we need backup. We can't fight alone here in Texas for our rights if the federal government, in which we have a Democratic trifecta, is not holding up their side. So they're there again. We now have almost the entirety of our Democratic caucus, 58 of 67 members, and they're going to keep pushing for what we all need, and that is the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, because if they do pass these horrible bills in Texas, it's game over for fair elections. We already are the 50th state in terms of ease of voting. It can't get any worse. We need, like I said, Senate Bill 1 in the United States Senate. We need Manchin and Sinema to do their job. And that's exactly what they're there to do. They need, Joe Biden needs to hear from them too.
Yeah. Oh my God, I'm so angry with Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema right now. God. I did want to ask, what do you think Governor Abbott will try to do to get the Democrats back? What is the plan going forward, like long term? Because how long can we hold off a quorum realistically?
So here's my understanding, and I might not be 100% accurate, but this is what I've heard. They are outside of the state of Texas, and Texas law enforcement cannot arrest them and bring them back to the Capitol. That is part of the reason of why they left state borders and why they went to DC, which also is not a state at the moment. Should be, but that's another fight. Session is supposedly 30 days, meaning it ends August 7th. And our Democratic friends are planning on staying in DC until the 7th of August when session ends. We are already seeing today Republicans give up and go home because they don't have enough people in this building to function, exactly because we broke quorum. And we're outside of Texas. We're outside of, Governor Abbott's jurisdiction. He can't rally up our people and bring them back. because we're not in the state. This is just like in 2003 when Democrats went to Oklahoma and New Mexico to avoid passing horribly racist gerrymandered maps. They were outside of the state. Texas Rangers can't find them and bring them back to work.
Right. Interesting. Okay. I didn't know this happened before.
It should happen. It should happen far more often.
It should.
It did happen for the. This is the 5th time in history. The 4th time in history was the second to last day of session when late at night, through Representative Crockett's leadership, enough Democrats, just over 50, because that's what you need, 50 of the 150 members to leave, went to a church in Austin to hide out and to pass the last Republican power grab at our voting rights.
Interesting. Okay. And can you tell our listeners, because they might not know, what exactly is the Democrats don't want to get passed in the state legislature?
Yes. So some may remember from the end of May, end of our regular session, Senate Bill 7. That was the Senate version of House Bill 6. Absolutely ancient and blatantly racist attempt to suppress the vote in Texas, most notably harming Black and Brown people. Currently, we are dealing with HB 3. We had quite literally 26 hours of hearing and testimony on it this past Saturday, in which we had hundreds of Texans from every corner of the state come in to voice their opposition. And House Bill 3, there are components that have been removed from House Bill 6, Senate Bill 7, such as they're not trying to get rid of Sunday voting, souls to the polls as much, but it's equally horrible. You know, voter ID, limiting hours, causing all these new hoops to jump through for voting by mail. It's all bad news.
And what can people from out of the state of Texas or in Texas, what can we do? Are there any fundraising links or any donations we can make?
Absolutely. Well, there's always going to be a need for the voting rights groups here in the state, Texas Rising, Move, Jolt, the list goes on. I'm, of course, going to say, please do donate to Representative Jasmine Crockett. Our goal in this next campaign, which of course we haven't started yet since we're still in the session, is to register and turn out more voters than ever before in our district. As you can imagine, there are so many districts in Texas that are safe, that don't get attention in general elections, and that is part of the reason that progressives have not won statewide. So we are one of those districts. We are incredibly safe. We are South Dallas, and we want to turn out more voters. That's going to take fundraising and engagement and organizers. So our link is donorbox.org/Jasmine for 100. We'll take it if you have it. We'd appreciate it. Aside from that, Powered by People is a great organization for fighting for voting rights every day, in and out.
I'm biased to support Powered by Youth, the organization I'm working with.
I am as well, as a Metro alum.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. You know, I am kind of nervous to see what happens, but it is great to talk to you. Everyone, please support Jasmine Crockett, and thank you, Zach.
Thank you so much.
My name is Jack DiPrimio, and you're listening to Next Generation Politics Podcast. Today is Friday, July 16th, and we were joined by Zachary Ganz. He is an intern with Jasmine Crockett, and she represents South Dallas in the Texas legislature. And we talked to Zach about Democrats leaving the state of Texas to go to DC to avoid Governor Abbott calling a special session and ending a quorum to pass dangerous dangerous bills that would restrict voting rights and transgender rights. We're also joined by Sam Weinberg, the founder of Settle for Biden, to talk about political strategy and political messaging. And we are also looking at the recent events in Cuba, where there have been mass demonstrations against the Cuban regime. It is a very fraught subject, and obviously we can talk about it without talking about the intervention the United States has played in Cuba's economy. We have pretty much decimated their economy with our embargoes. And we will be looking at this and discussing it further in the future. But let's get to talking about Texas. Before we get started, I do want to touch on what's happening in Texas right now. What is your reaction to the Texas Democratic state legislators basically fleeing, as they called it, to Washington, D.C. to break the quorum? And is it a sign that Democrats should toughen up and get a little bit more brutal or tougher when fighting Republicans and legislators?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you so much for having me. It is hopefully a sign of things to come in terms of Democrats taking a more hardline approach to defend voting rights and other progressive American values. I am not thrilled, obviously, that this has to happen, that the situation has presented itself where Republicans have tried to strip millions of Texans of their right to vote. But if that's what's happening, and that's what is happening, unfortunately, then yes, Democratic leaders and lawmakers should definitely be using tactics like we're seeing in Texas, fleeing to DC, so to speak, to advocate for the For the People Act. Definitely something that I would like to see more of from Democrats, especially in state legislatures.
Yeah, and because the Democratic Party, it's interesting, Nancy Pelosi can always hold her caucus together, but it seems that Chuck Schumer is the weak link in our federal government, in my opinion. I just want to ask you, who is that guy behind you on the wall, the painting?
Oh, it's no one in particular. I'm not even sure if it's a real person. It's just a painting I bought from an artist I like. Her name's Shauna Levinson.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you a political strategy question. Do you think that the Voting Rights Act, as it will be compromised with Joe Manchin, has any chance of passing without eliminating the filibuster? And are you worried about Chuck Schumer holding the Senate caucus together in that role?
It's really tricky. Look, the compromise bill, the compromise between with Manchin support after that followed the For the People Act, it has support from leaders like Stacey Abrams, who have spent a huge amount of time advocating for voting rights, and there are some what appear to be common sense compromises on things like voter ID, where you can say present a utility bill instead of a driver's license. But that's not going to be enough. It's obviously a step in the right direction. It's better than nothing. Whether it has a chance of passing or not is entirely on Joe Manchin, unfortunately. Chuck Schumer's leadership role is looking to be almost ceremonial, because if you have one member of your slim majority who is just not going to go along with things, that's just how it is. And that's where we are right now. Hopefully that's not where we're going to be in the midterms. Hopefully we can gain at least one seat in the Senate. And in terms of hardline, tactics like we're talking about in Texas, I would also like to see more Democrats in the Senate act like Joe Manchin, because anyone can be that 50th vote. And we saw this a few months ago when Mazie Hirono and Tammy Duckworth said that they weren't going to vote for certain cabinet picks or appointees. So you just need one other person to say, hey, this isn't working. And of course, that would be condemned by the establishment, but that's exactly what's happening right now already. So if one progressive senator can try to make things more progressive to counter Manchin more to the center, that would be interesting to see.
Interesting. At Bernie Sanders, we're talking to you, or Elizabeth Warren. I did want to ask you, who did you support in the presidential primary? Because I was stalking your Instagram. Were you a Warren supporter like me too?
So okay, so with the initial batch of 12, 15 candidates, I would have voted for Jay Inslee, just because of the emphasis he put on the climate. Then after the field narrowed, I sort of went back and forth between Sanders and Warren. I ended up voting for Sanders because by the time the Illinois primary came around, Warren had already dropped out. So it was between Sanders and Biden, and at that point, Biden pretty much already had it sealed, but I voted for Sanders. I've met all three of those people. I think they're all great. I think they'd all be, good in presidential roles. I think Elizabeth Warren is the most presidential of the three.
Yep.
Even though I did not vote for her since she had dropped out by the time I voted.
Yeah, I always thought, because I did support Bernie after she dropped out, like you, I always thought Elizabeth would have been the best governor in the role of the presidency, because she really understands how executive power works in Washington. I think more so than Bernie Sanders, and also Joe Biden is so mired in the traditional establishment. Well, this leads me to the question, how did Settle for Biden come about? Was that organized right after Bernie dropped out? And can you kind of walk us through the process of what you wanted and tell us how it started?
Yeah, so Bernie Sanders dropped out, I think, on April 9th, 2020. And I was seeing people in some of my friend groups, also just pundits online, talking about how they weren't going to be able to vote for Joe Biden. He was too far to the center, to this, to that, and it was a bitter pill for me to swallow as well. At the time, although I eventually came to a point where I was happy to be voting for him in November, but despite all of his flaws, and even when it was difficult for me, it was clear that he was a much better alternative to Donald Trump, especially with the pandemic having emerged. And then as 2020 went on, and we saw an incredible movement for racial justice, continued advocacy for various forms of social and economic justice and equality and equity, it just became increasingly clear that progress would be possible under a Biden administration, where it would just be really, really hard to get anything done under a Trump administration. And initially, Settle for Biden was just sort of a joke, just three words that were sort of floating around in my mind and a lot of people's minds, that it was sort of a way of me trying to convince myself to actually get behind Biden. And then it really struck a chord with a lot of people,
Yeah.
and grew. It didn't grow too fast. Between April and June, it was pretty stagnant, but it was something I was just doing if I had a little bit of spare time. Then it became really big, and it sort of turned into a movement, and I ran with it. And next thing I knew, I was managing a team of volunteers, doing media appearances, and putting up policy suggestions and cabinet recommendations, and really trying to get out the vote. It happened over the course of, really about 5 months, but it felt like it was a lot faster than that.
That's interesting, because it did speak to me a lot. And you describe it as a movement. Do you think the Settle for Biden accounts really swayed a certain portion of the electorate, especially among young people, to actually vote for Joe Biden? Or did it just help in the process of doing that? Do you think it flipped a lot of minds, or kind of provided catharsis for progressives to vote for him?
I hope so. I hope it did all of that. I mean, there's not a way that I can quantify it. I don't know exactly how many voters we turned out. I don't know exactly how many people had their minds changed by the content that we put out. But I mean, according to this, there's a youth-led consulting firm called JUV Consulting. They did a survey. 3% of American Gen Z saw at least one post from Settle for Biden. So to me, that's significant.
Can you repeat that number from the survey? Because I think you cut out for a minute.
Oh, yeah. Sure. Yeah. So there's a youth-led consulting firm called JUV Consulting, and they did a survey of Gen Z Americans, and according to them, 73% of Gen Zers saw Settle for Biden content during the election cycle. So to me, that's pretty significant.
Interesting. And I guess in a broader sense, how do you think progressives, especially now that we're in the Biden administration, should engage with moderates And what kind of like messaging do moderate Democrats really pick up on from progressives? Because sometimes I think that we turn some people off when we're too aggressive, like the kind of like toxic online Twitter culture. How do we engage with moderates?
The way to engage with moderates and even with conservatives, I think, is to not get caught up in their petty culture wars. Right now, we have a Republican Party which is losing on policy, losing demographically, and because of that, they're trying to erode our democracy. The Republican Party is only equipped to fight culture wars, to spew nonsense about critical race theory, cultural Marxism, and whatnot. Talking about Mr. Potato Head and Dr. Seuss. That is the Republican Party of today, and it's not seeming to become any more substantive. So, but unfortunately, when people go to the ballot box, they're going to be thinking more about Dr. Seuss books being out of print than they would be thinking about a tax credit they got from a progressive administration or something. So, Democrats can't cave to Republicans on those culture wars, but we also can't engage with them. That's the big thing. With moderates, it's a little bit different. I mean, we're talking in very abstract terms, and there's not really like
Right.
Any sort of universal tactic, I think. But with moderates, people like Joe Manchin and people like Kirsten Sinema within the Democratic Party, I think the key is to really, really push the narrative, the true narrative, the reality that lots of progressive policies have overwhelming majority support from the American people. So ending the filibuster, the For the People Act, it's not just that Democrats support it, it's that the American people support it. And if you just, push that as hard as possible, that's something that, to object to that is anti-democratic. And, we're not a direct democracy, but our government should represent the will of the people.
Definitely. And I do want to ask you about the Biden administration. And then I have a philosophical question that just came to mind. Are you pleased and kind of like pleasantly surprised with how the Biden administration is performing currently? And if you could speak to some issues that you have with them now, but also philosophically, do you think that it will take a more progressive president in the future to break kind of like the 40-year neoliberal, like kind of like neoliberal grip that has had such a profound impact on the Democratic Party that was kind of introduced by Reaganomics? Do you think Biden can kind of shift us away from that with his new policies, or will it take like a Bernie Sanders and a next president to really shift us away from the fundamental post-war neoliberalism that has gripped our party, beginning with Bill Clinton?
Okay, yeah, there's a lot there. So
Yes.
One of my biggest fears about the possibility of a Sanders presidency would that he would be sort of a second Jimmy Carter, someone who was a populist, very idealistic, but didn't quite know how to play the game well enough to be effective, and who would then usher in, someone even more conservative, like someone way to the opposite. And that's what we've sort of been seeing, right? Like we have this like dialectic where we go back and forth to overcompensate for George Bush, then we elected Barack Obama, and then we elected the exact opposite of Barack Obama and Donald Trump. And then in restoring some sense of normalcy, the responses, the opposites are of different features of each president, but the response to the previous administration. And so I hope that we can usher in some sort of gradual change, with the Biden presidency. And I think we're seeing some promising signs of that. But at the same time, the political conversation in America, this national conversation on our values and what we support is not going to come exclusively from the White House. It's going to come from the people. So there's a combination of factors there. The media plays a role, individual opinion, the government, but it's not Joe Biden alone who will lead us in any given direction. So yeah, I mean, I'm definitely hoping for more progressive presidents in the future, but I'm hoping that even more importantly, that they will represent progressive ideals that are embodied by most Americans. I would rather have, someone who I disagree with in the White House who represents the majority opinion than someone who I agree with in the White House who doesn't agree with the majority of Americans. So the really, it's not about just electing progressives. It's about changing the narrative on an individual and a national scale, everywhere in between, so that people are so that everyone is electing these progressives and everyone wants to elect these progressives.
Right. No, I totally agree, and I could go on for hours about how like we're nearing the end of the traditional post-war neoliberalism that was given to us by Ronald Reagan, and how like Trump was the Republican answer to that, and how Bernie Sanders could have been the Democratic answer to that. But I loved your answer about that. To wrap us up, I did want to ask, because this is a show for young people. Outside of social media, like what can young people do to put pressure on the Biden administration? And I know the Sunrise Movement has done a ton of work with young people directly protesting at the White House, but what advice can you give there?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on social media activism and how it's effective in terms of, right now, there's what young people can do is, I mean, people can doing more than they are doing right now, but it is sort of limited, right? So yeah, groups like the Gravel Institute and Path to Progress are operating mainly online. The Sunrise Movement is doing lots of stuff in person too. They're both important. Raising awareness about issues and educating voters and making sure that people vote and engage with their elected officials is really important, and social media can be a great tool for that. In terms of what's really going to transform the country, if we were talking about big changes in how our society works in terms of equity, it's not just going to come from voting or from sharing an infographic on Instagram. It's going to come from being involved with your community, being engaged in local issues, yes, like calling your reps and voicing your opinions, but also finding your own unique way to advocate for what you care about. For some people, barricading entrances to the White House is how they want to do that. For some people, it's posting on Instagram or doing a podcast. There are lots of different ways for people to get involved, and there's not really one right answer. People can do all of them. They can do some of them, one of them, whatever.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Sam. You're inspiring because I love your work. And everyone
Thank
follow
you.
at Path to Progress. That's a tongue twister for me.
Yes.
And thank you so much for coming on. It's great to talk to you.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, cut.